the escalation of tensions with Professor Abel Esterhuyse from the Stellenbosch University's Faculty of Military Science. A very good morning to you, Prof. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Let's start off with that extraordinary attack on the state broadcaster as they were live at that moment, the signal that sends, and also considering that an aircraft was being used here.
Yeah, I think it's firstly a clear indication of the precision with which Israel can destroy targets on the ground. That's, I think, a very important reality pertaining to the Israeli attack that one has to understand. But, you know, in terms of the implication, the media is a very, very important factor in keeping your population informed. In terms of keeping the government maintaining the ability to talk to your population, and by going after the media, you break that important connection between government and population, and you open up the door to a lot of speculation about the war, to a lot of uncertainty amongst the general population. And this ties up with the question as to what are the objectives Israel is pursuing in Iran, and whether regime change is part of that package of objectives that Israel are pursuing in Iran.
Yeah. But to what end, though, would Israel be pushing for that regime change?
Well, it is interesting to pick up on the narrative, not only from the Israeli side, but in particular from the American side. You know, there's the question as to what extent the nuclear capability is used as a screen for achieving other objectives, and the most important of those, of course, is the objective of regime change. And we've seen quite a lot of speculation. We've seen the narrative unfolding about that. And it's quite interesting that increasingly you have picked up the Israelis and the Americans talking about attacks on the senior members of the Iranian government, not only the military bureaucracy, but also them asking questions. In other words, putting it into the narrative, feeding it into the narrative, the question as to whether it is a legitimate target to go after members of the Iranian parliament. And we've seen this coming from both Israel and the Americans. Both of them are feeding this narrative.
Yeah, and as we've said before, the U.S. immediately after the first attack came out to say with the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, that, listen, this is a unilateral action, the U.S. is not involved. This morning we are hearing that the U.S. President has now cancelled or has now shortened his G7 summit participation because of this escalating war between Israel as well as Iran. To what extent then should we read into the moves that are being made by the United States, considering you also have this warning from Trump that is saying that Iran, you are losing the war, and also the call that people must evacuate Iran, which again, a warning from Israel, which we know similar warnings or similar tactic that has been used in Palestine?
Well, Heldren, I want to make the point explicitly here that I think the Americans are already involved in this from on all levels, from the tactical to the strategic and the political, and also in different domains. I don't doubt any moment that there's American intelligence that's being used. We all know that it is American technology that the Israelis are flying with, that they are using. And I mean, as I said, the Americans have been part of this bolding narrative against Iran from the beginning. Trump have made it very clear from the beginning that America is uncomfortable with the Iranian nuclear capabilities. So it is not as if the Americans haven't bowled this narrative. And there's no doubt that the Americans knew about this attack coming from Israel against Iran, and they could have stopped it if they wanted to. So that in itself is a reflection of American involvement. And what we have seen in terms of the Americans now shifting military resources from other parts of the world, their aircraft carriers, their bomber forces to the Middle East. That is sending messages. It is without doubt an indication to what extent the Americans are in on this action. So Trump can say a lot of things, but what the Americans say and what they do, of course, are two different things.
Yeah. And finally, we understood that President Cyril Ramaphosa was going to have talks with Donald Trump on the sides of the G7 summit. Not too sure if that's going to still take place, considering that Trump has cut short his stay at the G7 summit. But what does all of this mean, the Iran-Israeli conflict? What does it mean for South Africa, knowing very well South Africa's proximity, let's call it proximity, to Iran, especially through one of the governing parties with the ANC as well, and the warnings that had come from the White House even before that meeting that took place between President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as Donald Trump in the White House?
Yeah, I think this is placing South Africa in a very difficult position, and this is the difficulty of finding a balance between showing tacit support, I think, and trying to maintain a neutral stance. And South Africa, I think, find it very difficult in this case to maintain a neutral stance. And let me be very, very frank here in terms of Israel's attack on Iran. It places Israel in precisely the same category as Russia and Hamas in terms of attacking an independent, sovereign state here. Israel is in breach of the use ad bellum principle of the just war principle. And so it is up for debate in terms of Israel. And it places South Africa in a very, very difficult position. And it will be very difficult for our government to manage this tension between support for Iran, but also trying to maintain a relative neutrality, especially in terms of the history of our relationship with the Americans that have bowled up over the last 6 months.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Professor Abel Esterhuyse from the Stellenbosch University's Faculty on Military Science around the clashes that are playing out between Israel as well as Iran. We're going to